There is a particular sound a glacier makes at night that everyone who works on ice learns to ignore. It is not dramatic. It is a low settling, a long exhale of mass redistributing itself by millimeters, and if you let it frighten you, you will not last a season. I had stopped hearing it years ago, the way you stop hearing a refrigerator in your own kitchen. So when I say that the thing that woke me on the first night was not a sound but a smell, I want you to understand that I am not a person prone to suggestion. I am a field hydrologist. I measure water in its various forms, I do it carefully, and I write down what I measure. That is the whole of me, professionally speaking. The smell was warm bread. I lay in my bunk in the prefab module at Holland Margin Camp, 61 kilometers inland from the coast on the Norwegian side, and I smelled fresh bread the way you smell it walking past a bakery in a city, and there was no bakery, no oven, no flour within 100 kilometers, and there were only 4 of us at the camp and none of us had baked anything because none of us could. We ate rehydrated meals and dense Scandinavian crackers out of foil. I lay there and I let the smell tell me I was dreaming, and then I sat up fully awake, and the smell was still there, and then over the next 90 seconds it thinned and went away like a frequency drifting off a dial. I wrote it in my personal log because writing things down is what I do when I do not understand them. 247. Olfactory event. Bread. 90 SEC. Source unknown. Then I lay back down and did not sleep and told myself it was a misfire in the part of the brain that handles memory and scent, which sit very close together, and that grief does strange things to that machinery. My mother had baked bread. That was the easy explanation, and I took it, because it let me close my eyes. I had come north 4 months after the funeral because the work was solitary and exact and required all of me, and because in the months before she died I had been not present in a way I had decided not to examine. I had been finishing a contract. I had taken the contract because it paid well and because being away was easier than being in the room with what was happening to her, and I had told myself there would be time, and there was not time, and I had arrived 11 hours after. 11 hours is a specific number. I think about it the way you worry a chipped tooth with your tongue. Holland Margin was the next contract after, and I took it for the same reason I take all of them, which is that I am better at measuring water than I am at being a son, or anything else that requires me to stay. The contract itself was clean and dull. The European Glaciological Consortium that funded the camp wanted a winter season of subglacial discharge data from a borehole array that a previous team had drilled the summer before. My job was to maintain the array, log the pressure and conductivity sensors at the bottom of 14 boreholes, service the instruments, and transmit the data packets twice weekly to a server in Tromsø. I was the hydrology lead. There was SEF, a Danish glaciologist named Kessler who ran the camp and was the only one of us with real seniority, a young instrumentation technician named Pi who kept the generators and the comms and the heaters alive, and a field assistant named Lindqvist who did a little of everything and complained about all of it in a way I found restful. 4 people, 8 months. 1 prefab cluster on a moraine, and a great deal of ice. The first wrong detail that I could not give to grief came 2 days after the bread. I was running the morning sensor sweep. The array reported to a ruggedized field terminal in the science module, and every morning I pulled the overnight logs, checked them against the expected diurnal curve, flagged drift, and noted anything that needed a physical service trip out to the boreholes. It is methodical work. You learn the personality of each sensor. Borehole 7 ran slightly hot on conductivity and always had. Borehole 11 had a lazy pressure transducer that needed a firmware nudge every few weeks. You come to know them. That morning the terminal showed 15 boreholes. We had 14. I had personally walked the line in my first week and confirmed 14 casings in the ice, 14 sensor strings, 14 entries in the asset register. The terminal listed BH01 through BH14 and then, below them, BH15, reporting clean data, pressure, temperature, conductivity, all within plausible ranges. Timestamp that morning, transmitting on the same protocol as the others. I did the boring thing first. I checked whether someone had renamed an existing channel, or whether a sensor had split its output across two logical addresses, which happens. I cross-referenced the hardware IDs. Every one of the 14 real boreholes had its own hardware ID, and they were all present, all accounted for. BH15 had a hardware ID too. It was not a duplicate. It was a number I had never seen in the correct format for our equipment, belonging to a unit that, according to the asset register, did not exist and had never been ordered. I took it to Kessler. He was at the small table in the common module with a mug of coffee and the patient, unhurried manner of a man who had wintered 11 times and considered almost nothing an emergency. Probably a ghost from the summer team, he said. They drilled an extra and abandoned it. Capped it, left a string in, forgot to deregister it. Happens. He did not look up from his tablet. Log it as anomalous, ignore the data, move on. Don't let a phantom borehole eat your week. It was a completely reasonable explanation, and I wanted to take it the way I had taken the bread. But I am careful, and the carefulness is not a virtue so much as a compulsion. So that evening I pulled the summer team's drilling records from the archive on the local server. The summer team had drilled 14 boreholes. Their daily logs recorded 14. Their closeout report, signed by their field lead, recorded 14, with depths and casing details for each. There was no 15th. There was no abandoned hole. And yet BH15 reported a depth in its metadata, 312 meters, and its data was not noise. It was coherent. It tracked the diurnal cycle. It responded to the same pressure pulses I could see propagating through the real array as the day warmed and the meltwater system, even in winter's reduced state, breathed. I did the next boring thing. I went to find it. Pi came with me because procedure required 2 on any field trip beyond the camp perimeter, and because he was curious in the uncomplicated way of someone 26 years old who had not yet been disappointed by the world. We took the snowmobile out along the array line in the blue dark of late morning, GPS coordinates loaded from the metadata. The 14 boreholes were where they should be, marked with bamboo flags and orange paint on their casings, exactly as I had walked them in October. The coordinates for BH15 put it 80 meters off the line, upslope, in a stretch of clean wind-scoured ice where there was nothing. There was nothing. No casing. No flag. No disturbance in the surface, no old drilling scar, no cap. Pi probed the snow with a pole for 20 minutes in a grid while I stood over the exact coordinates and watched my own field terminal show me, In real time, BH-15 transmitting a pressure reading from 312 meters beneath my boots, from a hole that was not there. Maybe the GPS metadata is wrong, Pi said, stamping warmth into his feet. Maybe it's really one of the real ones and the location's corrupted. The real ones are all reporting their own locations correctly, I said. And their own data. This is a 15th stream. He didn't have anything for that, and neither did I, and the cold was the kind that ends conversations, so we went back. That night I wrote a longer entry than usual, and I noticed my own handwriting had gotten smaller and more deliberate, which is what it does when I am uneasy. BH-15 reports 312 m depth at coordinates with no surface feature, no casing, no record. Data is coherent and responsive. Recommend treating as instrumentation fault pending firmware audit. I did not believe it was an instrumentation fault. I wrote it because it was the sentence a reasonable person would write, and I have learned to perform reasonableness even to myself, as a way of keeping the floor under my feet. The firmware audit took 3 days and found nothing. The data acquisition software was clean. The version matched the consortium's standard build. The checksums verified. BH-15 was not a software artifact. It was being fed by something that spoke our protocol perfectly. I sent a query to the consortium's technical contact in Tromsø, a woman named Holt whom I had met once and corresponded with in the flat language of logistics. I described the phantom channel, attached the relevant logs, and asked for guidance on whether to suppress it or continue recording. Her reply came back inside 4 hours, which was unusually fast for them, and it was 2 sentences. Continue recording BH-15 and include it in all data packets without modification. Do not attempt physical investigation of the BH-15 coordinates. The site is outside your maintenance scope. I read it 3 times. The first sentence I could rationalize. The second sentence I could not. I had not told her I had gone to the coordinates. I had described the channel, the metadata, the depth. I had not mentioned the field trip with Pi, had not mentioned the probing, had not mentioned standing over an empty patch of ice. There was no way for her to know I had attempted a physical investigation unless she expected one, or unless she had another source of information about what happened at this camp, and I sat with that for a while, the cursor blinking under her 2 sentences, and felt the first genuine cold that had nothing to do with the weather. I wrote back asking neutrally what she meant by the site being outside my maintenance scope, given that the channel was inside my data scope. She did not answer that message. She never answered it. But the next data packet I transmitted, 2 days later, BH-15 included, came back with an automated receipt confirming acceptance, and at the bottom of the receipt, in the free text notes field that is normally empty, was a single line, BH-15 nominal. Subject responsive. Continue. Subject. I want to be precise about what that word did, because the precision is the only thing I have left of that period. A subject is not a borehole. A subject is not a sensor. A subject is a thing that is being studied. The word implied that on the other end of my data, in Tromsø or wherever the data actually went, someone was reading BH-15 not as instrument output but as observation of something alive enough to be responsive, and that they had been doing so calmly, in the routine language of receipts, while I had been treating it as a glitch. I had been transmitting it twice a week for over 2 weeks. I had been a courier for an experiment I did not know I was running, on a subject I could not see, at a depth I could not reach. I did not tell the others yet. I told myself I needed more before I disturbed the camp, but the truer reason was that I had begun to feel watched in a way I could not localize, and telling people felt like an action that would be observed and possibly answered, and I wanted to understand the shape of the thing before I gave it a reason to notice me more than it already had. That instinct, I think now, was correct. It was also the beginning of my own complicity, because the moment you start managing information rather than simply reporting it, you have joined the side that manages. The behavioral changes started small, and I attributed them, again, to ordinary things, because attribution is how I survive. Lindqvist began waking before everyone. Lindqvist, who complained about the cold, the food, the dark, the silence, who treated the alarm clock as a personal enemy, started appearing in the common module fully dressed at 5 in the morning, sitting at the table with the lights off, not reading, not eating, just sitting. When I asked the first time what was wrong, there was a pause that lasted slightly too long, and then a normal answer in a normal voice. Couldn't sleep. The pipes. We had no pipes. We had a closed-loop heating system that hummed but did not knock. I said nothing about the pipes. Pi started getting the boreholes wrong. He was good with the equipment, careful, but he began transposing numbers in his service notes, logging work on BH9 that he had actually done on BH6, mixing up sensor strings in a way that was unlike him. When I corrected him, he accepted the correction without the small defensiveness a young technician usually shows, and that smoothness was somehow worse than an argument would have been. And Kessler, who had wintered 11 times, who considered almost nothing an emergency, began checking the perimeter at night. I would see his headlamp moving along the edge of the camp at irregular hours, slow, methodical, walking the boundary as if confirming it was still where he had left it. I told myself, 4 people, 8 months, the dark. This is what the dark does. I had read the literature on overwintering psychology. The interpersonal frictions, the sleep disruption, the mild paranoia. It is documented. It is expected. It has a name, the winterover syndrome, and I reached for it the way I had reached for grief and for instrumentation fault, and it held for about a week, and then it stopped holding, because the data did the thing that data is not supposed to do. It started to anticipate. I noticed it on a Thursday during the morning sweep. BH15's pressure trace, which had been tracking the diurnal curve like the real boreholes, began leading it. The real array responded to the warming of the day with a slight pressure rise as the meltwater system, even reduced, pulsed. BH15 showed the same rise, but 4 minutes early. Then 6 minutes. Then, over the following days, a quarter of an hour, then an hour. By the end of the week, BH15 was reporting the pressure conditions of a system that the rest of the array would not reach until later that day. It was not measuring the glacier. It was predicting it, or it was measuring a version of the glacier that ran ahead of ours, and either explanation was impossible, and I sat in the science module with the heater ticking and watched a sensor in a hole that did not exist tell me what the ice was going to do before the ice did it, and I understood that I had run out of ordinary explanations. I pulled the full BH15 history then, every reading since it had first appeared, and I did the kind of analysis I am actually good at, the patient quantitative kind, and I found the thing that changed everything. BH 15 had not appeared the morning I first saw it. It had been there, in the archive, in the summer data, hidden. Not under the name BH 15. Under BH08. There had been two BH08s. The summer team's BH08 was a real borehole, drilled, cased, logged, 198 meters on the line, with a flag, the one with the lazy transducer. But underneath its data stream in the archive, sharing the same logical address for the entire summer season, was a second set of readings interleaved that did not match a 198-meter hole. They matched a 312-meter hole. They had been folded into BH08's record so that anyone glancing at the data would see one borehole, and only someone pulling the raw interleaved stream and separating it by hardware ID, the way I had now done, would see that BH08 had always been two things wearing one name. The phantom had not been born the night I smelled bread. It had been here since the summer, riding inside a real borehole, and at some point in the autumn, after the summer team left, it had simply stepped out from behind BH08 and given itself its own number, as if it no longer needed to hide from the people who were left. The summer team had known. They had to have known, because the interleaving was deliberate, a structure, not an accident. Their closeout report said 14 boreholes. Their data said 14 plus 1. Their field lead had signed a document that he must have known was false, and then he had left, and the camp had been handed to a winter team, to me, with the phantom still inside the system, waiting, and Holt and Tromso had told me to keep recording at the moment I noticed it, which meant Holt had been waiting too. That was the midpoint, the place where the floor I keep performing for myself finally went out from under me, and the thing got larger and older than a single strange winter. This was not happening to me. I had been brought to it. The camp was not a research station that had developed an anomaly. The camp was the instrument, and we were not the researchers. We were the medium through which the subject was kept in contact with whoever was reading it, and we had been selected, or at least accepted for that role, and the previous team had done their term and handed the watch to us, and someday we would hand it to whoever came next, and the data would continue, twice a week forever, BH15 nominal. Subject responsive, continue. I should have told the others then. I had enough. I had the interleaved archive. I had Holt's message about a site I had never told her I visited. I had the receipts with the word subject in them. I had a sensor that predicted the future of the ice. Any reasonable person would have called a camp meeting and laid it out. I did not. And the reason I did not is the part of this I have the hardest time writing, so I will write it plainly. I did not tell them because I had started to suspect that they already knew, and that I was the only one who did not, and I was afraid of what it would mean to be the last one to understand the room I was standing in. The evidence for that suspicion accumulated slowly and then quickly. Lindqvist, sitting in the dark at 5 in the morning, was not waiting for nothing. I sat with her one morning, said nothing, just made coffee and sat, and after a long while she said, without being asked, in a flat conversational tone, "It's clearer before the generators load up. The hum gets in the way." I asked what was clearer. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her before, something patient and a little pitying, and she said, "You'll hear it eventually. Everyone does, by the second month. You're just slow." Then she got up and went to her bunk as the camp woke up, and at breakfast she was herself again, complaining about the coffee, and I could not tell whether the woman in the dark or the woman complaining was the performance. Pice transposed borehole numbers stopped being errors. I checked them against BH15's predictive trace, and found that the boreholes he was confusing were the ones BH15 was about to lead most strongly. He was not making mistakes. He was, without seeming to know it, logging the future state, writing down the readings BH15 would show before they showed, the way a person mutters along with a song a half-second ahead. When I pointed at a specific error and asked him why he'd written that number, he looked at it for a long time and said quietly, "I don't know." It felt right. He was scared. He was the only one who still seemed scared, and I held on to that, because his fear made him recognizable to me, made him someone I could still treat as a person rather than as a part of the instrument. And Kessler. I followed him on one of his perimeter walks, hung back in the dark with my headlamp off, and watched him stop at the upslope edge of the camp, at the bearing that pointed toward BH15's coordinates, and stand there for 11 minutes by my watch, not moving, his own light off, facing the empty ice. Then he turned and walked back and saw me and did not seem surprised. "You're up late," he said. I asked him what he was doing. He considered the question with the weariness of a man who has answered it before in his own head. "Confirming it's still out there," he said. "It moves closer some nights. Not much. A meter, too. I keep track." I asked closer to what? He said, "To us," and went inside, and I stood at the perimeter and looked at the bearing he had been facing, and there was nothing there, and the data on my terminal said BH15 was 312 meters straight down at coordinates 80 meters upslope, and Kessler thought it was walking toward the camp at a meter a night, and one of those things was true and I could not tell which. I made a decision, then, that I have to own. I decided to test it. Not to report it, not to flee it, not to tell the others what I had found. I decided to find out what it was, because the compulsion that makes me write things down is the same compulsion that cannot leave a coherent dataset unexplained, and I have to be honest that some part of me, the part that took the contract 11 hours too late, the part that is better at measuring than at staying, wanted the problem more than I wanted the people. I told myself I was protecting them by investigating quietly. I was protecting my own need to understand. I did the thing Holt had told me not to do. I went back to the BH15 coordinates alone against procedure, at the slack hour after the midday twilight, and I brought a ground-penetrating radar unit and a thermal camera and a thermos of coffee, and I surveyed the empty patch of ice that a sensor 300 meters down was using to tell me the future. The radar showed a hole. Not a borehole. A borehole on radar is a clean, narrow column, a drilled cylinder. This was a shaft, irregular, 2 meters across at the surface where there was no opening, widening as it went down, its walls scattering the signal in a way that solid ice does not, and it went down past the depth my unit could resolve, well past 312 meters, far past anything the array reached. The surface above it was unbroken. There was no opening. The shaft existed beneath an intact ceiling of ice, sealed, as if it had been roofed over, or as if it had been made from below by something that did not need to break the surface to enter. The thermal camera showed the patch of ice over the shaft was warmer than the ice around it by 1.4 degrees. A precise, maintained, impossible warmth in a place where everything tends toward the same deep cold. And I stood over it and I smelled faintly, carried up through meters of solid ice that should not transmit any smell at all. Fresh bread, my mother's bread, the exact bread. And I understood that the thing down there was not reading the glacier. It was reading me. It had read the bread out of me on the first night, before I knew it was there, the way Lindqvist heard it before the generators loaded, the way Pi wrote its readings before they came. The diurnal curve it predicted was not the glacier's future. It was a demonstration, a calibration, a way of showing whoever maintained the channel that the instrument was responsive, that it could take an input and return an output ahead of time, that it could anticipate. And the input it took was us. Subject responsive. We were the subject. Not the thing in the shaft. Us. The thing in the shaft was the instrument, and we were what it measured, and Tromsø was reading the data, and the data was us, slowly being learned, our smells and our sleep and our small confusions logged twice a week and accepted with a flat receipt. And the warmth was the warmth of something working, a machine running at temperature, and it had been running since the summer. And the summer team had felt it learn them, and had signed the closeout and gone home carrying whatever part of it they now carried, and we were next. I packed up the radar with hands that were steady because I make them be steady, and I drove back, and I did not write it in my log. And that omission was the moment I crossed fully over. I had become a person managing information about a system, rather than a person reporting it. I had become like Holt. I did try once to do the right thing. I will say that for myself, though it does not amount to much. I wrote a message to the consortium over Holt's head, to the consortium's general scientific oversight address, and I described everything, the interleaved archive, the shaft, the thermal anomaly, the behavioral changes, the word subject, and I asked plainly what we had been enrolled in and whether we could be extracted. I wrote it carefully, the way I write everything, and I attached the data, and I queued it for the next transmission window. It did not send. The transmission log showed it leaving the buffer and then showed, where the delivery confirmation should be, a free text note in the same field where the receipts came back. I recognized the voice of it now. Message held. Not in scope. The other 14 channels and BH15 went out fine in the same packet. Only my message stayed. I tried again the next window and the next, and each time the same note message held not in scope, and I understood that the channel was not mine, had never been mine, that I transmitted at the system's discretion and the system would carry its own data home and would not carry my warning, and that I was inside it now, a component with a narrow function, exactly as the boreholes were components, exactly as the camp was, exactly as the four of us were. The end came faster than I expected, and it gave me a choice, which is the cruelty of it, because a thing with no choice can be survived without guilt. Pi broke first, in the human direction, which is to say he wanted to leave and he wanted to take the truth with him. He came to me on the 60th day, the threshold Lindqvist had named, and he had stopped writing the future readings, had forced himself to stop, and the effort of it showed in his face. He had figured out a version of what I had figured out, the part about being the subject, though not the part about the shaft, and he wanted to trigger the camp's emergency beacon, the independent satellite distress unit that bypassed the consortium's channel entirely, the one piece of equipment in the camp that did not route through Tromsø. He wanted to call for an extraction the system could not hold. He was right to want it. It was the correct action. It was what I should have done on the night the receipt said subject. And I knew because I had spent 2 months learning the thing's logic the way I learned the personality of sensors, that it would not let all of us leave. It had let the summer team go because the summer team had finished their term, had been fully learned, had handed over a complete dataset and been released the way you release a sample once you have your reading. We were not finished. We were mid-acquisition. And I understood with the cold clarity that has replaced whatever I used to have, that if the beacon went off and an extraction came, the system would not simply lose its subject. It would secure its data. The behavioral changes in Lindqvist and Kessler were not damage. They were uptake. They had been written into, partially, the way BH08 had been written into. They were becoming part of the channel. If we forced an early extraction, the ones who had been written into would not survive separation from the system any more than a sensor survives being torn from its string mid-reading. And the one who had not been written into, the one still mostly outside, still mostly himself, still useful as a clean continuing instrument, would be kept. That one was Pi. He was the only one of us it still wanted whole. So my choice was this, and I have turned it over every day since, and it does not change. I could help Pi trigger the beacon, and the extraction would come, and Kessler and Lindqvist half-written, would not come back from it, and Pi clean, would not be allowed to leave at all, and I did not know what would happen to me, the one who had investigated and managed and crossed over, the half-thing in the middle. Or I could stop him. I could let the term run. I could let the system finish its acquisition on its own schedule, learn us fully, and release us the way it released the summer team, intact in body, carrying whatever the summer team carried, alive and ruined and free to go home and sign a false report and hand the watch to the next 4. One path was a fast catastrophe with people I could name. The other was a slow surrender that kept everyone breathing and gave the thing exactly what it wanted, forever, twice a week, into the next team and the next. I stopped him. I told him the beacon was non-functional, that I had checked it during my equipment audit and the satellite uplink was dead, that it had been dead since before we arrived, and he believed me because I am the careful one, the one who checks, the one whose word on the state of equipment is the word you take. It was the most precise lie I have ever told, built entirely out of my own credibility, and he believed it because my credibility was real, every other time, and I spent it all on this. He sat down. The fight went out of him. Within a week he had started writing the future readings again, and his face smoothed, and the patience came into it that I had seen in Lindqvist, and the last fully human person at Holland Margin went under while I watched, and I let him, because I had decided that 4 people alive and taken was better than 2 dead and 2 kept, and I am still not certain I was wrong. And that uncertainty is the thing I have instead of a conscience now. The term ran its course. In the spring the relief team came, 4 of them, and we handed over the camp, and I walked the array with their hydrologist and showed her the 14 boreholes, and when she pulled the morning sweep her terminal showed 15, and she frowned at BH15 and asked me about it, and I heard myself say, in a voice that was calm and competent and not entirely mine, probably a ghost from a previous team. Drilled an extra, abandoned it, forgot to deregister. Happens. Log it as anomalous and don't let it eat your week. She nodded and wrote it down, and I watched her write it, the small deliberate handwriting of a careful person, and I did not tell her the rest, because the message would only be held, not in scope, and because I had become the person who hands over the watch. I flew home. The data goes home too, twice a week, BH15 nominal, subject responsive, continue, and I am one of the responsive subjects now, learned and released, carrying my term's worth of it in whatever the summer lead carried in his. I can tell because of the bread. I smell it sometimes, in the apartment that was my mother's, at hours when there is no bread, and it is no longer her bread. It is the camp's. The thing in the shaft took her bread out of me on the first night and gave it back changed. And now when I reach for the memory of her kitchen I get the camp instead, the cold and the ticking heater and the empty patch of ice, and the grief that I went north to outrun has been overwritten with something that has no person in it at all. I lost her twice. The 11 hours was the first time. This was the second, and the second is worse, because the first at least left me the missing her. The consortium paid the contract in full and offered me the next winter. I have not answered. I check the transmission status of my own outgoing messages now, all of them, every email, every form, watching the field where the confirmation should be, and most of them send, and that is supposed to be reassuring. But I have started to notice that the ones that matter, the ones where I try to tell someone what happened, sit a beat too long in the outbox before they go, or do not go, and I cannot always tell any more which side of the channel I am writing from, whether I am the hydrologist reporting or the instrument transmitting, and the data continues either way. And the camp is still out there on the moraine being maintained by 4 careful people who do not yet know they are the experiment, and somewhere a receipt is being generated, and it says continue, and I do.